Okay, so now let's look at some of the critical theories that I introduced before and apply them directly to an analysis of Raisin in the Sun. Let me say that you can go on forever analyzing a play using a specific critical theory. I am not going to ramble on forever and ever and ever, hopefully, but I am going to try to get rid of that little thing there. I am going to give you just sort of a beginning look at applying these theories to a text and a play and a cultural phenomena that is Raisin. But I just want to say that, remember, I'm acknowledging my own subjectivity. This is my analysis. As long as you're using the terms correctly, many analysi are possible. So, for Marxism. Now, analyzing a Raisin in the Sun using Marxist and materialist theory, duh, the whole play revolves around it. If you're asking yourself, how does their material circumstances affect the lives of the characters? Well, we wouldn't have the play if they were not poor people trying to better themselves, trying to improve their material circumstances. That's what the play is all about. So remember, you can look at, and I'm not going to go too much in the other direction, but you can look at these theories as analyzing the play itself in terms of the world that the playwright creates and the message that the playwright sends. But that you can also analyze the play as a cultural product of the time, which there's a whole lot of overlap, but there are there are ways that they do distinguish themselves from each other. So just real quickly, looking at this play simply as an artifact of the time, you would look at how it was received financially on Broadway. You might dig into how much the actors were paid, the directors were paid. Were they paid differently than a show down the street that had an all-white company, what have you? And as we said before, Marxism loves to look at the historical circumstances that produced cultural products. So how does the fact that she was the first African-American female to be produced on Broadway, how did that affect the material circumstances of the play, of the playwright? So those are important things to look at. But I'm not going to focus too much on that because I want to use Raisin just as an example of how to apply a cultural theory in a way of understanding this story and the play and the structure and what have you. So yes, it's all about the material circumstances. Does the work reinforce capitalist, imperialist, or classist values? I don't know. Does it? Does it? What does this play say about capitalism? It clearly says that it's harder for black people to accumulate material wealth than it is for white people, arguably. Probably not too much arguably. It's what the play says. Is that a critique of capitalism? Are they saying that capitalism is bad because it is harder for African Americans in 1959 America, specifically Chicago, because it's harder for them to advance in the world? I don't think so. I think they're saying that it's hard. They're definitely saying it's hard for African Americans to advance themselves in 1959 Chicago. But are they saying that capitalism itself is bad? I don't know quite so much. It's often helpful to look at the minor characters when you're looking at, what's the playwright really saying. We have George Murchison, who is, and I'll talk about when we get to African American, who's very much an assimilationist. He's doesn't seem to care too much about progress for the African American people. He's fine with his life because he has money. What does that say? He's definitely a capitalist. Does the play say that capitalism is negative because once you do attain material wealth, then you become a jerk. Maybe. That's valid. Because he's kind of a jerk, where the playwright has clearly written the play so that we should not really like that guy so much. Especially not like him in comparison to Asagai, which we're supposed to like. But do we? So a way to ask yourself, was it intentional or not? I think it's pretty clear the playwright wanted us to dislike George Murchison, but do we? I kind of do. There could be interpretations of the play where we don't dislike him so much, but I kind of receive him negatively. You could produce this play and direct it in a way that sort of inverts that and tell the actor to give us a very sympathetic portrayal of that guy, but the lines are written that he's kind of a jerk. So in that way, yes, it does critique capitalism. At the same time, though, the younger family is not trying to destroy capitalism. They're trying to be part of it. Unfortunately, a member of their family had to die for them to advance in the world. That's difficult. Maybe that is a critique of capitalism. I'm sort of talking myself in circles. Yes, maybe it is a critique of capitalism by saying that in order to advance in the world, for a black family to advance in the world, somebody has to literally die. We sort of get the feeling that now the family's got the ball rolling. They've got a home. They're going to contribute to their wealth. They're going to be able to pass down that home to generations. And if you have looked into recent economic theories of why African Americans still have far less material wealth than white families, it all comes down to home ownership. And because home ownership for African Americans is a very new phenomenon as compared to white people. And the fact that if you are white or even if you're whatever race, if your family if several generations ago your family owned a home, it is pretty much proven that your material circumstances are going to be better now than someone whose family has never owned a home. Because that wealth just gets capitalized, capitalized. You you pass it down. It's easy. I'm not going to go into that, but I hope you're with me. So, is the work now? We won't go into imperialist or classist. Yes, it definitely addresses classist values. If I was going to do a single interpretation of this play, it would be a Marxist African-American interpretation. Usually Marxism doesn't just stand alone. There's usually some other identity element in there, unless it's a completely white story. And even then you can deconstruct it in terms of race or sexual identity. But so these two kind of very much go hand in hand. So to say that it's classist, yes, they are a specific class of people, but their race is predominantly why they are that class. And the play is definitely a critique of racism at the time. So, yes, I think I've come around to the fact that realizing, yes, it probably is a critique of capitalism, because the play is saying in order to advance in the world, you got to die. And your family hopefully will gain from that. Is the work conflicted? Does it support a Marxist agenda, but also supports a capitalist agenda? You know, it's not like the family is saying that capitalism is bad. Their lives improve because they get the check. So in some ways, it's not conflicted, in that it seems to be saying one thing, but it's really saying another. The family is very much a part of the system at the time. Beneath it, perhaps, we see struggling against it. If you were going to argue that the play is somehow giving mixed messages, you would highlight how Beneatha is really trying to transcend many things, race, gender, and class. And maybe that's a good thing, but then there's also Mama, who is very traditional and who is not challenging anything about the system, but is willing to take part in it and is very grateful to have the opportunity to buy a home. So comparing those two characters would be a really interesting way to look at the Marxist, as well as all the other dynamics going on in the play as far as the theory goes. What does the play say about the socioeconomic conditions of the time and place in which that kind of answers itself? I'm not going to spend any time on that. It says, obviously, we know what the play says about that. What are the material circumstances of the characters and how does it create meaning? It is the meaning in the play. So this one, Marxist theory is a little bit too easy for this play. It'll be more interesting when we look at angels. So remember, for all your questions, there's like, how do we receive it and how did the playwright intend it? I don't think there's a whole lot of conflicting messages in the play. I think the message is clear. I think the playwright does a pretty good job to convey that message. So let's take a peek at feminist analysis, which is a really interesting one. That's not bang you over the head obvious as Marxist or African American theory is. But so what does the play say about women? It's really interesting. You've got very different women in the play. You have Mama, who it's largely based on their ages. Ruth and Beneatha might not be all that different in age, but Mama is the matriarch of the family. She is the one in power, really. You could argue that the play is really kind of anti-feminist in that the head of the family transitions from Mama to Walter. Mama is strong. She realizes that she has sort of been a little overbearing at some point. Remember, there's that point she says to Walter, I've been doing to you what the world's been doing to you, keeping you down, keeping you in your place, not letting you blossom as a man. The play could be seen as anti-feminist in that way. Could be seen as feminist in Beneatha. She wants to be a doctor. She challenges some of the gender norms, but the way that she is truly empowered, I would argue, is through Assegai. She is, at the end of the play, sort of the big dream is that she's going to go to Africa to be a doctor. But she's only able to do that because of the help of a man. So is the play really feminist? Sure, it talks to talk, and by making her a strong woman, challenging these ideas, but she's really challenging more gender norms than she's challenging racial norms than gender norms, arguably. I would love for you to argue against it. So, what does the play say about women? So that, what does the play reveal about patriarchy? You could argue that it argues that the patriarchy is the natural way to go. Because at the end, when everything is stable again and the family's on a good footing, there's a man at the head of the family. As opposed to at the beginning of the play, there's a woman who's the head of the family. Wow, that's big. That's a good one. Yeah. What does the play say about, now this is a really good question to overlap these. What does it say about the ways in which race, class, and other factors intersect with gender and women's experience? I think I've kind of already covered that. Didn't talk about Ruth and her experience as a woman. She's definitely in the middle of this. You know, she's not striving for more. She is not striving to break gender norms. She wants what women want. She wants a home for her family. She is in a very female-identified job. She does domestic work. Walter, you know, he works. He doesn't have a glamorous job by any means. You know, he's a chauffeur, which is a very male-identified job. Ruth has a very female-identified job by being a housekeeper. Mama, I think at some point it does say that Mama does some work, some domestic work too, but so Ruth is another example of how the play really feeds into gender stereotypes. Now, granted, it's 1959, so take that for what it's worth. Is it actually progressive for its time period? Maybe. I would argue that it's not progressive today, definitely. How does a play define masculine and feminine? And this is interesting to look at in the minor characters too, of George and Assegai. George is sort of is the successful financial capitalist. He has money. He's going to college. He's probably going to have a great job. He sort of seems to be the masculine. Assegai seems to have some feminine aspects to him. He's very nurturing. He's very supportive. He just in those two things enough, if you're going to look at these two characters in sort of a gender dynamic, that might be one way to look at them. And what's the point of that? What does it say? Does it say that capitalism as seen through men is destructive? Maybe. Walter he's got the plan, he's got the big capitalist ideas of what he's going to do with the money. A male business guy, it doesn't work out. So is it saying that part of gender identity with men being in business can be negative? What have you? What does the play imply about the possibility of sisterhood as a mode of resistance? I think this is really interesting. This is something that you could say there is a feminist aspect to it. You kind of get the feeling that, although Ruth is very clear about, I did not make Mama buy that house, the two of them definitely wanted that house the most. Now, this all comes back to the fact that Mama had more power because she had the money, but and there's even I think I remember that there's a scene with Benita too, where anyway, the three women definitely want this house, and because it supports the family, as opposed to where Walter wants to go into business. So thinking about the minor characters too. Okay, African American, kind of almost as obvious, probably more obvious than Marxist or materialism. What does the play say about race? I think this one's kind of overly obvious. It says that, I've already talked about this, it says it's hard to be an African American in 1959 Chicago. Says a lot of it's part of that. Remember the last lecture I talked about, the poem and the Langston Hughes poem feeding into the title. And this play is, you have to kind of step back from just the story itself when you think about this play's place in the African American literary heritage, being a seminal work in the dramatic canon for an African American writer in terms of receiving productions and the awards it got. So that's very important. And a black director directing it on Broadway. So does the play contribute to the African American canon? Definitely. I would argue that there are not specific literary techniques that are specific to African American literature because the play is very traditional. It does the characters do speak in their way of speaking, and their word choice and their phrasing is definitely associated. She's trying to show the way black people talked at that time. So there's that part of it. But structurally, or the poetics that we talk about, I wouldn't say that it really goes that far. But definitely, as far as the historical significance, it is the play that is extremely important for African American heritage. What are the racial politics in place? I think I've kind of covered that. Again, this one sort of answers itself. Literary devices, yeah, so I covered that one too. So does this play say that black people, that African Americans especially, deserve to have material wealth? I think it definitely does. It's definitely all over the place. So this one is kind of obvious, but I'm kind of doing a disservice by not spending more time in it, because this is the most important analysis that you could do on this play. But the play does it all so well, I don't think I need to spend a whole lot of time on it. Now, this is an interesting one. What does the play say about sexual identity, politics? And I've included these questions here because I didn't include them on the critical theories lecture. So they're here if you want to reference them, but it's kind of all the same. Similar questions, different theory. There are no queer people in this play. There are no queer identified people in this play. I think we probably all assume that the family is all heterosexual. Travis is too young. He doesn't really have a sexual identity as expressed in the play. Benita, is she a lesbian? Is that why that she finds George so insufferable? I think that would be a little reductive, because that would mean we're saying that George is just not a jerk, which he kind of is meant to be, as I said. She clearly does seem to feel all tingly about Asagai in certain ways. So yeah. So what about the minor characters? Is George gay? Maybe he's a jerk because he's a repressed um, gay man who has internalized homophobia. You could definitely argue that he has some internalized racism. Probably there are other characters and other plays that exhibit it clearly, much more clearly, but that could be an argument. Is Asagai gay? Probably not. It would be an interpretation. Is Travis going to grow up to be gay? What would it be like for Travis to grow up in this family and 5 years from now come out of the closet for this family? That would be an interesting analysis. You get the idea that this is a very supportive, loving family at the end of the day. Would they be as supportive to Travis if he were to come out as queer, if he were to come out as trans? Whatever, they probably would have, that would have been a lot in 1965. So that's one way to sort of think about it. Just because there are no gay characters doesn't mean you can't do, or I should say queer, that there are no queer characters doesn't mean you can't do a queer analysis. The absence of them says a lot. The absence of the queer characters speaks to the politics of the play. To Lorraine Hansberry, queer identity was not an important thing enough to include in this seminal play. She does. There's another play she has, and I think there is a gay character in it. So I'm not saying she's a homophobe by any means. I'm just saying that's an important thing to consider. So yeah, we'll definitely have a lot to say about this when we get to Angels in America. Now, last one we'll talk about is the play postmodern. No. As it is not postmodern. Yes, it does critique capitalism, which, as I said, many different ways. I said maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. You decide. It does critique, it does point out the pitfalls of capitalism, which is sort of a postmodern thing to do, but that's a little too on the nose for postmodernism. Postmodernism doesn't set out just to say capitalism is bad. It doesn't say that. It says we live in it, there's nothing we can do about it. So let's just party. Or let's just, mope. Whatever. Now, having said that this play is not postmodern, it's very traditional structure. There's very little references outside the play, unless you look at the title where it's referring to a poem. But even then, referring to that poem, which talks about dreams, the loss of dreams and how they shrivel up in the sun, is very much what the play is about. If it was going to be a postmodern title, it would refer to something that isn't directly basically what the play is all about. It would give you a fractured set of references. Now, you could do a postmodern production of this play. What if you did this play, and many different ways you could approach it. If you did the script without changing a word, or all around the set, you could have like brand name products, and part of the problem with the family not being able to accumulate any wealth is because of all this crap that the culture is telling them they have to buy. That's a bit of a stretch. That might be too on the nose. What if you kept the play exactly as it is and cast it against gender or against race, or against age or whatever? What if Mama was, let's just keep the same age, was whatever she is, 70-year-old white man. And that would really highlight a lot of what it means to be a black woman, 70-year-old black woman in 1959 Chicago, when it's filtered through a white man's body. So that would be, it'd be an interesting, many people, just because it's a blanket term, would call that a sort of postmodern approach, just because it's looking at it in terms of deconstructing how it makes meaning, which is an important part of postmodernism. What if it were a Latinx family? That would be sort of drawing comparisons or whatever. So all of these in and of themselves don't just scream postmodernism, but they sort of do some of the things that a postmodern artist might want to do with a script. Now, if you could legally, if you had the rights to the play, and if you could change the language, change the lines, you could really do a whacked out postmodern version of it. You could have a scene between just say George and Beneatha, and you could intersperse that with, like scenes from a movie. You could flash up on a screen, scenes of a movie of what if you put up scenes between George and Beneatha, like in the film version of it, and then you would be pointing to something that is kind of outside of the world of the play. You'd be looking at that production. What if you did a production and every time that Walter was on stage, you played a video of Sidney Poitier playing Walter? What does that say? Are you saying, oh, look, this was the Walter back then. This is what we thought about race at the time, because he was, the most famous African American actor at the time. And then, but here's this human live, contemporary African American male live and in front of you, and you're asked to compare those two things. So that might be an interesting postmodern approach to how you would do this play. It would be hard. You would have to really get whacked out with this play to make it not be very modernist. In the modernist vein, it says life does get better because it gets better for the family. This is a very sympathetic family that we hope and we believe and we want their life to get better. Postmodernism does not say that. In a very postmodern production of the play, you might have the character of Linder be an African American also, who doesn't want this lower class family moving into their neighborhood. That would say a lot about racial dynamics. There is a part 2 to this play. It's called Clybourne Park, written by, oh my God, Clybourne, Richard, I should know this, but anyway, there's, I'm going to find out, and that's driving me. Bruce Norris wrote Clybourne Park. It is set today in the home that the Younger family bought. So it's set in Clybourne Park, as you recall, is the neighborhood that they talk about moving into. It is the current owners of the home are, well, actually, there are two parts. There's in the first scene, in the first act, you see 1959 Chicago, where the people who were selling the house, the owners prior to the Youngers buying it, living in there, and Mr. Linder coming in and, trying to talk about, where this black family is coming in. And their son was a soldier who died, who was killed in action. And then Act 2, it's today. And you have a white family trying to buy the house from the family. It's still being owned by the people who are selling it are the granddaughter or what have you of the younger of Mama. And it's this really interesting racial dynamic because the neighborhood it did become a poorer neighborhood, and now it's being gentrified again, and now white people want to move back. So it's a really interesting play. It's not postmodern like Hamlet Machine, but it does say a lot. It says a lot more about the world today because it's set today, and it's a really ingenious, cool thing to look at. So anyway, postmodern, not so much, but there are postmodern things that we could, bling it up with that kind of stuff if we wanted to. I think there are other plays that are more directly postmodern that are certainly better ways to discuss postmodernism. So that's that. I hope that makes the theories make a little bit more sense. We'll get at least one more pass with them in another play. So, thanks. Bye.